Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David, and to our very special guest again. Hello, Matt.
Oh, it's great to be back. Hello, David. Hello, Rhonda.
Welcome to our listeners around the country and across the world to episode 287.
My heart leaps for joy when I see you, Matt. And we always get such wonderful comments after you've done an Ask David with us. And people love your warmth. They don't think you're particularly bright, but they like how nice you are. They love your warmth, your wisdom, and it's just really fun to jam. And I hope we have some fun today too. And I hope everybody loves it.
Great. So I'm going to read just two really quick endorsements. This was about in January 26th, David put on a free addiction workshop through Pessy, the publisher of your book, Feeling Great. And I assisted a little, and we had a person from the audience assist. And we got some really great feedback. We had two people in particular. One wrote, Dear David, this is regarding the free addiction workshop. I don't know how to thank you, Dr. Burns. May the Lord bless you and keep you strong. And that was from Thomas. So thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
Oh, was that Thomas? Did he give a last initial or?
He did not.
Oh,
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I might know who that Thomas is, a fellow I've been corresponding with a lot who, and if it was that Thomas whose last name begins with a Z, thank you a whole lot for those kind words.
Yeah. And we had one other comment from there. Hi, Dr. Burns. At the last minute, I was able to change my schedule so I could attend your free seminar on habits and addictions. It was beyond great to see and hear you work with someone while illustrating the principles of how to skillfully bring resistance fully forward. Thank you for the opportunity to see you again. Jan.
Jan? Was that Jan?
Yes.
I wonder if that was Jan Stanfield from down in Southern California. She's a really neat person, and she's been going to my workshops and intensives, I bet, for at least 25 years, not, all the time, but frequently. And she's really, really a neat person. I've talked about her sometimes in workshops too. What happened once when she was in a workshop and I was talking about a fellow with post-traumatic stress disorder, and she made such a fantastic contribution.
I think that was her, because she also said, P.S. I'm doing very well in all my various work, and I love having 9 grandchildren.
Oh, wow. Well, anyway, whatever Jan you are, I love you to death, and thank you so much. And we always appreciate the kind words of people who email in. So thanks to all of you. And one other thing I might say is we asked you folks to help us about 2 or 3 months ago, and we were saying that we don't have money. We do everything for free, and we don't take ads. And so we don't have any budget for marketing or anything like that. And so our only marketing is word of mouth. And so if you like the podcast, tell your friends or anyone you know who's depressed or interested in mental health issues, and that'll help us out. And since that time, our monthly downloads have gone from, it was then around in the mid 90,000s or just a little over 100,000. And then in January, we went to 138,500. It was our biggest month by a good 10,000 downloads. So thank you all if you're doing that, and keep doing it. We'd like to push it up as high as possible. And so you're all our sales force, although we have nothing to sell. We're giving away almost everything for free. but we just love hanging out with you, and thanks so much for your support. We really means a lot.
Definitely.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe in honor of that you did this free habit and addiction workshop, David, where the first 3 of our questions are on various aspects of treating habit and addictions. So I'll read the first one is from William. William asks, how would the TEAM model look with addiction and procrastination? I assume you can't expect that addiction and procrastination issues will be resolved in a single therapy session. Can you? Thanks a lot, William.
So you want to take a first shot at this one, Matt?
Well, I'm sure I'm a bit a deer in the headlights because there would be a lot to discuss here. We could probably have several podcasts on this one topic. I could dive in and talk about some of the unique aspects of the testing model or the empathy model in the context of addiction, or
sure, anything you want to throw out there on that. And I have a couple things to throw out as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so so the testing model, of course, is very important. It can make the difference between life and death to know, the amount of use of a substance, for example, the risk of an overdose or fatal withdrawal reaction that could occur. So we want very accurate testing. One issue that comes up when there's addiction is oftentimes denial or shame or underreporting that can leave us a bit in the dark. And there are answers to these kind of questions to some extent. We'd want to get some collaborative information, maybe from family members, or do some laboratory testing to confirm that we're getting accurate information. When I was training in the hospital, we'd frequently be called, the psychiatry service would be called because someone was experiencing delirium, hallucinating, and their blood pressure would be through the roof, and et cetera. And it was because they had not accurately reported the amount that they were drinking on a daily basis. And so the surgery team, for example, might not have known to provide them with something to prevent withdrawal. So the testing is really important, and things that we would want to test would include, how intense cravings are, the frequency of use, how tempting the substance is, as well as things like their motivation to stop or change this behavior, to quit, their willingness to endure feelings of deprivation. And so we would be measuring some different things there. In addition to, we'd want to have, a complete treatment here. So we'd want to also be aware, do they also have anxiety, depression, other, maybe relationship problems or work-related problems, legal problems, other health problems, et cetera, that we want to be screening for to be able to help an individual who's struggling with addiction.
Well, those are great points. As far as the testing, it occurred to me that one of the best tools is the temptations test that I created. It's a 5-item test with a reliability of, I think it's above 95%, so it's super accurate. And the neat thing about it, if you're treating an addiction, you can ask the person to take it once a week, and it doesn't ask them how much did you drink this week, because they might lie, or how much drugs did you use, because of that denial point that you made, Matt. But it asks people how tempted they were. How tempted were you this week to get high? How did you have to struggle with urges to use, and then not at all, somewhat, moderately, a lot, extremely, and so the score goes from 0 to 20. And generally, people who are using, they will own up to the fact that they've had to struggle with temptations a lot, so then I just say to them, boy, I know given the amount of temptations you have, it's pretty much impossible not to give in to the urge to use, to drink, to whatever it is, to binge. How many times did you use this week? Was it every day or many times a day? How often was it? And so I'm giving them choices, all of which are high numbers of times. And that makes it easier for them to say, well, actually, it was pretty often a doctor. So that can also be helpful. As far as the model, we just gave a 2-hour free workshop on this exact topic, Rhonda and I. And so if you go to PESI, I'm sure they're posting it on their Facebook page or maybe on YouTube, something like that, if you want to watch it, because that goes through several of the tools. And also you can download several of the tools with explanations of how they work on my website, feelinggood.com. And at the bottom of the homepage, it says, click here if you want a free unpublished chapter from Dr. Burns's new book. And then you actually get 2 chapters that were not published because the book was too long. So I withdrew them, and I'm just giving them away free. That you'll see for example, the triple paradox, the habits and addiction log, the devil's advocate technique, and the decision-making tool, powerful new tools for habits and addictions. And yes, you can typically get most of your work done in a single session for addiction and procrastination, although those are handled very differently. I see people for a 2-hour session, and I can get most of that work done in one session. But if it's a very serious addiction, it may require a longer term treatment. You can also read about Benny. If you go to my website, the podcast, go to the podcast on Benny. He was a hardcore heroin and cocaine dealer and an addict and a suicidal and violent individual. And you can see what happened with him in a group I was treating at my hospital in Philadelphia. And he was threatening me, and he was pretty extreme. And it was really a kind of a miracle that happened there in about 30 minutes. And if you're interested in procrastination, I've done podcasts on it. Just go to my website, feelinggood.com, go into the search function and type in procrastination, and you'll find the whole single session treatment for procrastination spelled out in a pretty clear, I think, step-by-step way.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
No. Oh, okay. Well, okay. Well, I'm probably not as. Clearly, I'm not as skilled as the two of you. I found procrastination is really hard to do in 2 hours. Maybe sometimes because the techniques that we use with them, like little steps for big feet or the pleasure predicting chart that we have people fill out. They fill it out, and then they see if they can implement it during the week, and then people want to come back and talk about it and tweak it. That's kind of probably not the right use of that word. And so it's kind of fun to have some follow-up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think that everyone should be treated in a single session, or that therapists should be able to do that. But I do like to get most of the job done right up front, really, really rapidly. And then, of course, if someone has a really hardcore problem, a tough problem, they may take a while. And sometimes if someone is really hardcore into say drinking or something like that, I tell them that if you want me to work with you, I can give you something that AA can't possibly give you, but AA can give you something that I can't give you. Like to work with me, you'd have to agree to go to AA 7 days a week initially, and get a sponsor, or if it's a narcotics issue, and 1 + 1 = 3, and working together, we can get that job done. Or if you don't like AA, go to another daily support group for your addiction.
I'm glad you brought up AA. I have a client I think she's managing her cravings and her temptations and her urges really well through, pretty frequent AA meetings. And her work with me is about, her internal, like her, she has on her last daily mood log, she had a lot of literally labeling thoughts about herself, like I'm not good enough and I'm nothing, and other types of ways of labeling her. And our work is supplementing, just like you said, David, her attendance at the AA meeting, and that they really go nicely hand in hand.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love AA. They say the best things in life are free, and AA is free. AA is not perfect, but it does offer some wonderful things, not the least of which is acceptance, which is a very powerful thing we might talk about later on this podcast or the next podcast as well.
Okay, well, let's leap to our next question. Oh, Matt, do you want to say anything?
I had two other comments. One is, David, you've made freely available the decision-making form.
Yeah.
And I have seen patients recover just while using that, where they just realize how much better it is, that they just really decide in the moment to change their life and will recover. And so that's a powerful tool that's freely available.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to comment briefly, the empathy here can be quite tricky because it's normal for us to feel angry with someone we care about who's harming themselves. And that anger often gets expressed, or fear gets expressed with, demands or criticism and rejection. And so frequently that dynamic plays out with both family members and therapists. So the person who's struggling with addiction is feeling alone and rejected and ashamed. And that's one reason I think AA is powerful, to be able to meet and say, hi, my name's Matt, I'm an alcoholic or an addict, and to have that sense of community. And it's also important for the therapist and family to learn how to express their concern, their love in ways that's not critical or rejecting, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so neat. Yeah, acceptance is such a powerful thing. Acceptance is actually the key to change, although it seems like the opposite. When I was a medical student, I don't know how this happened, but I was supposed to go and meet with this businessman about raising fund for some documentary on something or other. I don't remember exactly what it was, but all I remember is I sat down in this guy's office at his desk, and he said, "Let me tell you right off the bat that I'm an alcoholic, and I feel sorry for anybody who isn't an alcoholic." And I said, "My gosh, why is that?" He says, "Because I've been in AA for 17 years, and I haven't had a drink in 17 years, and it has made such a change in my life. I feel like a lucky guy." I thought, man, that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard something like that before.
Yeah.
So
talk about positive reframe.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Here's our next question about habit and addiction. And it's Robin asking, what is the difference between a habit and an addiction?
Well, let you take first stab at that, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure, but I do think there is a difference between certain substances that we know stimulate dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens of the brain that are highly addictive, and habits that are, so I would probably characterize those as more in the area of like addiction, and a habit more like things that, I check my email a lot more regularly than I would like to, or, maybe I bite my fingernails, and there could be some endorphin release there, but.
With a serial killing, you can get into the habit of that too.
That too, yeah. I had a problem with that for a while.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. That's a simple distinction there, although it's kind of a continuum too. And how you use language is arbitrary to some extent. Does alcoholism exist? Is there such a thing, or just people who are drinking excessively, and then the amount you drink and the seriousness and the impact on you can vary tremendously from 0 to 100%, and people try to come up with definitions of these things, but they're just arbitrary concepts. I would say. Like they also say, if your alcohol intake is causing health problems, and then you continue, that would be the one part of the definition of alcoholism. If you look in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders published by the American Psychiatric Association.
Or if in other ways it's the substance use is getting in the way of your functioning.
Yeah, that's another criterion that's often used. Or if you go into withdrawal, you know, when you discontinue whatever it is that you're addicted to. But anger, to my way of thinking, can be an addiction. A lot of people are just they're angry at the world, they're entitled, and they kind of get their whole sense of meaning and identity from being enraged at people in general, or some group of people, or people of the wrong ethnicity or race or color or religion or whatever. And those things can be pretty intense addictions too, even though they're not accompanied by physiologic brain dependence like a Valium or benzodiazepine addiction, where you're taking so many that if you go off of them abruptly, you might have an epileptic seizure because of the rebound effect in the brain.
Well, the next question actually is a good piggyback for this, because Edwin asked about more of a habit. He said, I struggle with the habit of internet surfing, news, social media, etc., when I'm avoiding boredom or unpleasant tasks at work. Do you feel that motivation and cognitive techniques are sufficient for addressing this habit, when it often feels like my actions operate below the level of consciousness? I often start surfing the internet before I even consciously realize what I'm doing. Additionally, I've found stimulus control to be difficult for this habit, given that I work on the computer all day. So what's the best treatment for internet surfing? Edwin.
Okay, good, great. And my brief answer to this one is that he asks, can you use team therapy for something that's below consciousness, an addiction like your internet surfing, which comes on unconsciously? Many people have it when they're asleep, so they go internet surfing when they're asleep. It's like sleepwalking, but it's called internet sleep surfing. And,
I didn't know.
and my question is, depends on how many inches it is below consciousness. But with that, I'll let Matt respond, and then I'll give my real response.
Well, yeah, it's I think we do have a rich set of tools and methods that could help with this type of problem. The decision-making form itself might be a good one to look at. What are some of the advantages that the status quo behavior offers him? Like maybe some relief from boredom, or something might be really interesting that he'd look at. Just to have a little break in the day might be nice. So we'd want to look at all the advantages of what the current behavior is offering him, as well as disadvantages of setting it aside. He might feel deprived or like a slave to his schedule or something like that. And, to ask, is he sure he wants to change this? Why would he want something different in his life? And then if he does, then we would have a lot of methods that we could offer to make that process a little bit easier. But first, I'd really want him to convince me this is something he wants to change, rather than something he wants to have available to him just to kind of relax a little bit during the day.
Mm-hmm.
I love that answer. And this whole thing that it's, below conscious awareness is just what the psychiatrists and psychologists call denial, and the Buddha called bullshit. And whatever word you want to use, it's just such baloney what you're telling yourself. But I thought your ideas there were fantastic, Matt, that all addictions are really problems. They're not problems of cognition. They're problems of motivation for the most part. They're not problems of habit or behavior, although those things play a role, but they're motivations. And that's what the triple paradox is. One of the first tools you might want to use is what is your internet surfing? What's great about it? First, that's the first column in the triple paradox sheet. The middle column is what are some disadvantages of giving up this habit or addiction? I point out how sucky it is to stop doing your internet surfing. And then the third column is, what is your disregard of work and internet surfing show about you that's positive and awesome, you and your core values? Look at the really positive side of your addiction from these three different dimensions. And then if in spite of, and we can almost always come up with a list of 30 positives for your addiction. And then if you can still convince me to work with you, then that's great, and then it'll be easy to beat the thing. But you've got to deal with the habit and addiction first, and then if you wanted to do it, I would say let's get specific. Okay, you wanted to beat your internet surfing. What time of day did you want to beat it? Because you can't beat it in hyperspace as some vague abstract thing. That has to come at a particular time, and then we say, okay, now what kind of help did you need at that time? And then we'll make a plan and see, is that something you need my help with, or is that something you can implement on your own? And of course, the answer is always something you can implement on your own. And then I would have the patient implement that at a particular time when he would ordinarily be internet surfing, and then agree to do 5 minutes of that plan at that moment, and then agree to email me at the end of that 5 minutes and just say, mission accomplished, or I stubbornly refused. And there's a few other bells and whistles, but that's kind of how it works. And once you've broken the thing once, then it becomes much easier to continue to break the back of that habit or addiction or whatever it is you're trying to change. So thank you.
Well, it sounds like what Matt and David, what you're saying is, Edwin, maybe it's denial or maybe it's something else, but Edwin may think that the habit is, he's not consciously aware of it while he's engaged in it. But what you're talking about is he is consciously aware of what he's doing during the treatment for his habit and addiction.
Yes, and he is involved. He does know what he's doing when he's doing it as well. For example, if I walked up to him with a gun to his head and said, tell me what you're doing, I think he would be able to figure out what he's doing.
Some disarming of the experiences that sometimes our thoughts are hard to identify. They can be sort of, these automatic negative thoughts can be a little bit challenging to pick out. Okay, why do I feel tempted or hopeless about something? And I think it can be useful to get those on paper, to dig a little bit for, what am I telling myself in the moment?
What are the temptations? That's the devil's advocate technique. Yes, it's absolutely helpful to write that down on the addiction log. Say, oh, work is boring right now, and I'll just surf for a little while, and a little while can't hurt, and I might find out something really cool. Just make up thoughts like that, and then the ones you make up will be the ones that you're actually having. And then you can have a friend tempt you and play. That's the devil's advocate technique, or a therapist. And the friend can say things like, Ed, you're kind of bored right now. And, you may be at work, but why don't you surf the internet for just a minute or two? It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, there might be something exciting and new on Netflix or in the news.
Yeah, exactly. And then see if you can defeat your friend, see if you can crush that tempting thought. And that's called the devil's advocate technique. And that's a good one too. Thanks for reminding me about that, Matt. There's several techniques. If you download those 2 free chapters from the bottom of my homepage, the homepage of feelinggood.com, and there's a ton of free resources at feelinggood.com. They use the search function. There's all the podcasts. There's blogs, there's free classes on a whole variety on depression, anxiety, and other topics. So you'll find an awful lot of useful stuff at feelinggood.com.
Okay, so Matt, we have 2 questions from you. And the first question you wanted answered is, what is the full list of questions that David finds irritating? And David.
I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I do sometimes get in a cranky mood. I try to pretend to be better than I actually am. But sometimes questions, I get a little cranky with certain ones and I probably shouldn't get cranky, but one of them, I get a lot of vague questions, kind of like, Dr. Burns, I've been anxious all my life. What should I do? So kind of general questions like that. And or I'm really depressed. What's your advice, or something like that? And these general questions are not at all the way I work in therapy sessions, or how I've worked with my career. I've tried to write books with answers to those questions. Like my book, When Panic Attacks, is kind of a step-by-step guide to how to deal with all of the anxiety disorders. And I would prefer it if somebody uses those resources and then asks me a specific question about them. There's also a free anxiety class on my website. And as I've mentioned many times, you can go to my website and there's a search function on every single page, and you can type in anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or phobias or social anxiety. You'll get all of the very best podcasts and blogs on that topic. So you can get that basic information for free. And then you can apply it to your own situation, use some of the techniques that I've described, like do a daily mood log. What time of day was it when you were anxious? Where were you? What were all your feelings? What were your negative thoughts? What are the distortions in those thoughts? And then we could talk about some of the 40 techniques in my book, When Panic Attacks, for overcoming every conceivable kind of anxiety. And that way I can use my time and share it with you folks, working with somebody who has a negative thought that they can't challenge, or a kind of anxiety that you're struggling with, or you're afraid to do shame attacking exercises to overcome social anxiety, or you don't know how to do this or that technique. And then we can really present something of great value, not only to you, but to other listeners as well. So I think that's pretty much the main one. And I really appreciate people writing in and asking questions, and all the great support you've provided for this podcast. And I'd just like to be able to give better answers to better questions that when people ask about how to help with this kind of relationship problem or that kind. Another general question would be, why is my husband the way he is? Or why is my wife the way she is? Or why are people the way they are? And a vague kind of question. If you read my book, Feeling Good Together, or listen to the podcast on relationship conflicts, or the 5 Secrets of Effective Communication, you'll find the exact tools and how to do a relationship journal. What did the other person say? What did you say next? And then we can analyze your response and say, was that good or bad communication? What will be the impact of the kind of response you made? And what would be a more effective way to respond to your husband or your wife or your partner or whoever? And we can even role play it and show the actual solution. And that way you'll learn something from the specifics. See, the devil's in the detail, they say, and nothing could be more true than in dealing with emotional and relationship problems as well. All of the answers you're looking for will be found in the details.
Great. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Beautifully. And I can understand too, David, why you would not want to answer certain questions that were quite vague or not specific. That's almost impossible to do in a meaningful way. I love the sound of my own voice and can just drone on and on if someone asks me a really vague question, but it's unlikely to be that helpful for them. I'm unlikely to strike the precise piece of information that's most important to them, any more so than if I just randomly flip the encyclopedia open to a page and start reading.
Yeah, that's right. I love what you're saying, Matt. But then again, I can't be too harsh on people because it took me much of my career to figure this out in the first place. And there was probably a time in my life when I thought vague kind of bullshitting, excuse the expression, was somehow important or helpful. But I found now that all the help is in the specific details What did the other person say? What did you say next? What was the negative thought you had in this situation? And then we can make some beautiful music together.
Thank you. Matt, you asked another question. How do we help patients who don't get the acceptance paradox? And I'm going to just read bits and pieces of what you sent. You wrote, I have a question about one moment in time, the actual moment of recovery. I'd like to better understand what is happening in that moment and why some folks, especially those with hopelessness and a strong desire to be better, get stuck at the brink during externalization of voice of resistance, for example, and respond in ways like, I'd love to accept myself, I just don't know how. And it's too hard to accept myself. My assumptions are that the cognitive and motivational models are correct, and that self-criticism and the desire to criticize oneself, i.e. high standards, are what result in low self-esteem and feelings of worthlessness. Hence, to make the transition from depressed to recovered, the process would start with approving of our depressed self. Putting this another way, we can't recover before we recover. So in the actual moment of recovery, we will be accepting our self-critical, depressed self, flaws and all, including the flaw of being self-critical. If so,
that's pretty complicated.
Yes.
I love this question because I've been trying to think about how to teach the acceptance paradox for our app, and trying to figure out how we do it in teaching in my Tuesday group, and maybe in your groups, Rhonda and Matt, where you're teaching mental health professionals. I remember we had one amazing resident at Stanford, Greg Tarasoff, I think was his name. And he was really a nice guy, very idealistic. In fact, he ended up working with people in parts of the world where, third world countries, after he finished his residency at Stanford. But it was just when I was starting the weekly group. And I was trying to teach the acceptance paradox, and that the idea that enlightenment is accepting yourself, and he couldn't get it. Most people can't get it. It sounds so unappealing, like you're settling for second best when you accept your flawed, crappy self. And for 7 weeks, we worked on that, and he could not get it. And then the 8th week, he suddenly got it, and it was like a light bulb went on in his head. And he suddenly saw things with a new set of eyes that he hadn't seen before. But how do we get people to that level of self-acceptance? I mean, the Buddha struggled with this too, 2,500 years ago. I don't know much about him, and whatever I do know, I'm mainly just bullshitting and making it up. But I saw on TV that he had over 100,000 followers, and only 3 achieved enlightenment. And I can see why, because it's hard for people to get enlightenment. It's hard for people to get acceptance. So I have a couple ideas on it, but let me ask you first, Matt and Rhonda. What ideas do you have about this very challenging topic, which is so crucial from a psychotherapy point of view, because once you get it, your depression has a good chance of improving or vanishing completely. But it's also a kind of spiritual concept that I would say is woven into all the religions of the world. They all express it differently with different symbolism and different rituals and different words. But I think it's one of the core mystical concepts in practically every religion. But having babbled now, I'll let you folks say something meaningful.
I'll defer to Rhonda on this one. This is a tough one, and I think I set it up to be difficult.
Well, I'm wondering how much the self-defeating beliefs that we suffer from, that's underlying our day-to-day kind of existence without us being aware of them, are getting in the way of acceptance. So that if we can identify the self-defeating beliefs, like achievement addiction or love addiction, then it might be easier to accept ourselves.
I think that's a great point, because we have a systematic approach for challenging those beliefs. Like, my worthwhileness depends on my achievements and productivity. I can't feel truly happy and fulfilled unless I'm achieving great things. That would be the achievement addiction. And that is the kind of belief that gets in the way of enlightenment, as well as the love addiction and the approval addiction. So working with people to get rid of their self-defeating beliefs, going through the cost-benefit analysis, then the semantic technique, and then the experimental technique, and then the fear fantasy technique. That definitely can be one of many roads to self-acceptance and enlightenment.
Yeah, the first tool that you gave me that I use so many times to help so many people find acceptance was the cost-benefit analysis. Mm-hmm. I remember trying to work with people who are very profoundly depressed, understand why the perceived advantages of rejecting themselves, of telling themselves they need a better self.
Yeah.
And they should be this other thing. And we look at the high standards that they're holding for themselves, oftentimes their morality, not wanting to settle, like you said, and maybe not wanting to reward bad behavior, really wanting to earn their worth rather than have it granted to them.
Yes. And I think that the positive reframing we do at the agenda setting phase of the session, or called assessment of resistance, helps with emotional acceptance. Mm-hmm. You, instead of beating up on yourself because you're ashamed and you're shy, and you're saying, I shouldn't be shy, and I shouldn't have OCD, and I shouldn't have all these flaws, the positive reframing can help you see the beautiful side of your so-called negative feelings, what they show about you and your core values that's positive and awesome. And also some of the benefits of these so-called negative feelings, as well as why they're quite appropriate. And then the moment you accept them, they paradoxically diminish or usually disappear completely. And that's what I call the acceptance paradox. So that part is pretty easy for me to understand. Now, Matt, do you remember when you achieved enlightenment once driving home from a supervision group? A session that we had at that pizza place?
I recall several, almost every experience I had training with you, David, resulted in that. So you'll have to be more specific.
Oh, okay. Well, now you got me pumped up.
Good one, Matt.
Flattery always works with me. But we were driving home. We'd had some good discussion of, I don't know, someone you were stuck with, some patient, just as we did every supervision group, and some personal issues maybe that we were working on too. And we came to some kind of a stop sign or something. You were driving, and you looked over at me and you said, Dr. Burns, I just want you to know that I'm trying so hard every day to become a better and better person. And you look so sincere and serious about this. And then I looked into your eyes. I tried to look equally sincere and serious. And I said, Matt, I hope you get over that one of these days. And then you burst into laughter. And to me, that was the moment you achieved enlightenment. And it was like liberation from this trap of thinking, I have to become this wonderful person. And the way Jill expresses enlightenment or acceptance, and again, this is kind of crude, so turn off your podcast if you don't like 4-letter words, but I have to quote it in its richness and entirety. And she said that enlightenment is that when we decide to accept our shitty self. And then we started laughing, and she says, but a lot of people don't want to do that. They haven't gotten it yet. And that really did it for me also, because you can spend your life just trying to become better and better and better, and thinking it's like going around the Ferris wheel for that gold ring or brass ring or something, thinking something wonderful is going to happen once you perfect yourself enough or become good enough or great enough or something like that. But I learned my enlightenment from my cat Obi, just that cat who came to our back door half dead, and feral cat, and he came into our household, and we saved his life, and he came to love me, and I came to love him, and our moments together were beyond great. But there was nothing, he wasn't special and I wasn't special. It was just being together. It's the same with us. Like, we're just hanging out today. What could be more wonderful than this? And so that to me is another kind of enlightenment, is just suddenly realizing the joyousness of life and the moment, and the fantastic thing that we're alive, that we have people who want to hang out with us, and that the life is like this banquet, and you don't. It's all the food is for free. You don't have to pay big money to get into the banquet. It's just open to everybody type of thing. That's another lame attempt to get the concept of enlightenment across. But people, as you say, Matt, don't want it. They say, "Oh no, I'm not going to give up on myself. I want to beat up on myself. I'm going to achieve perfection. I'm going to achieve greatness." Other people can lower their standards because they're not that smart. But me, I'm going to keep beating up on myself because I'm the one who's going to get to the top of the mountain. That's the trap, I think, that a lot of people find themselves in. I used to find myself in that trap, I have to admit.
Can I add that you can reach that path of acceptance or enlightenment in a lot of different ways. And I think, I'd say that most of the techniques that, if not all of the techniques that you've created, David, have the possibility of allowing somebody to reach enlightenment or acceptance. I was working with somebody yesterday, and we did the examine the evidence, where you imagine that you're in a courtroom and you're presenting all of the reasons to believe a thought as if you were saying them to a judge, like just the objective facts, and all the reasons not to believe a thought as if you're presenting to a judge. And I thought, well, this is kind of a simple thing. Maybe this will help. I didn't give it much weight. And we had already tried the double standard technique, where he was, speaking to himself like he was a good friend, and that fell flat. But the examine the evidence was like really profound for him, and he reached a level of acceptance that I didn't actually think was possible, but it worked really great. And I've had that before with other techniques where I've thought, well, we could just try this and see what happens, and people have, the results have been amazing.
That's so neat. I love what you're saying. And what works for one person won't work for the next. That's why we've got a lot of different paths to pursue, a lot of different techniques to find the one that works for each person. But when I was a psychiatric resident, no one ever told me that we were trying to get people to enlightenment.
Right.
We were just trying to give them antidepressants so they get maybe 30% less depressed or 40% less depressed or something like that. Any other thoughts on so that's a great thought, that any method, when it works, can possibly bring a person to enlightenment. What other ideas do you have about how we can teach enlightenment, Matt?
Oh, I mean, maybe I agree with everything you and Rhonda are saying, that there's just so many diverse ways to get to a place of, no longer feeling burdened by feelings of worthlessness or hopelessness, shame or guilt. That's what's enlightening about enlightenment, is we leave those feelings behind. If we're discussing just trying to understand the acceptance paradox, I remember a couple things that were helpful for me. One is that you had a list of healthy and unhealthy acceptance.
Oh, yeah.
And that was useful to just read through that and see, okay, there's this kind of unhealthy acceptance that I wouldn't want to get into, where I'm approving of, like, I guess I can just go out and murder people or do whatever I want. And then the other type of more healthy acceptance, which is, as a flawed human being, I will make errors.
Mm.
Yeah.
And to persecute myself for that doesn't improve things.
Yeah.
So I like that list that you made. And was it also your metaphor that of the golden doors versus the open door, the wooden door? I don't know.
I'm not sure. If it's good, it was mine. If it's dorky, it was probably the Buddha's.
I liked this one. It was the description of this golden door that there was a long line to get in, and it was just beautiful. It was like this perfect work of art. It was huge, but the door never ever opened. It was just a long line of people waiting outside to try to go in, and they were all very upset and depressed, but hoping that maybe one day they would get through that door. It was like this perfect door. And then there was another door that was just kind of hanging by one hinge, blowing in the breeze back and forth. You could go in and out anytime you chose to. And on the other side, everyone was having a great time. You could see people joking around, loving each other, flaws and all. And yet there was no line to that door, but there was a long line to this golden door.
That's fantastic. It must have been my story, but I have to admit it wasn't. But I really liked it and feel like I just learned something. That's a nice one too.
Maybe someone can tell me where I got that from, because I don't remember.
Yeah, maybe a listener will know. But yeah, that's a good one. I had a woman that I've just been writing about for the app, because we're going to have a module on acceptance. But there was a woman who came to one of my intensives, and I call her Amani. That wasn't her name, but I know she was from an area in Los Angeles that she grew up in, kind of a South Los Angeles, like a very poor neighborhood. And I was about to do the lunch break at the work. It was an intensive at the South San Francisco Conference Center. And I asked for someone to volunteer because I wanted to demonstrate a technique, just like for 2 minutes. We were about 4 minutes before the lunch break. So I just wanted somebody to say, here's how this technique works. And then this woman came up, Imani, and she started sobbing and saying, I really need help. And I said, well, my gosh, I wasn't planning to do a live demonstration. I can't treat somebody in 4 or 5 minutes, but maybe you can tell me what's going on, and maybe I can at least give you a little empathy and support. And she said, well, I'm here at this workshop, and there's all these high-powered people here, like, psychiatric residents and postdoctoral fellows from Stanford, and people from, sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health. And she says, I've never had any training like this. I just went to the neighborhood schools that weren't very good. And she had eventually gotten a master's degree from a community college in clinical social work. But she said, I just feel awful because I'm just an inferior second-rate therapist. And, I don't have all this fancy trappings that all these people here have. And then I empathized a little. And then I said, if some kind of miracle happened here today, what miracle would you be hoping for? And she said, well, the miracle of joy and happiness. So I wouldn't go around feeling bad about myself and feeling inferior and worthless and second rate. And she said that's the miracle I'd be hoping for by the end of today's workshop. She said, I don't know if that's possible, but that would be amazing. And then I said, well, I don't know, what I can offer, but I definitely have some powerful techniques, but they're only going to change the way you think and feel, and I might be able to show you how to achieve happiness today. But that's the good news. The bad news is you're still going to be a second-rate inferior therapist. And so you've got a choice how you want to feel at the end of today's workshop. You can even either feel like a miserable, guilty, ashamed, depressed, inferior, second-rate therapist, or you can feel like a joyous, happy, second-rate therapist. So what's your choice going to be? And then she got her enlightenment at that moment, and she said, I get it. I'll go for the happy second-rate therapist. And she started laughing, and she had been sobbing just a minute earlier, and she suddenly got it. And that took like 4 minutes, and we had to break for the lunch. But that was the first miracle. And it was pretty mind-blowing. I think it was one of my fastest cures ever, if you want to look at it that way. But it was so neat. But the second miracle happened after lunch, because then I had the audience of maybe 135 mental health professionals break into twos for a half an hour or something like that. And I said, one of you will be the patient and talk about a real problem you have, and the other can be the therapist, and you try to provide warmth and support and, using some of the empathy techniques you've been learning in this workshop. And so they paired off, and then at the end of the half hour, I said, now I'd love to get some feedback. Would anyone care to say what this experience was like for you, and whether you were the patient or the therapist in the exercise? And this woman was raising her hand and, wanted to get my attention. So I called on her, and then she stood up and said, well, I just had one of the most amazing experiences in my life, and I think I was just being treated by the one of the greatest therapists in the world. I just had a fantastic experience. I can't believe it. And I said, oh, well, who was your therapist? And then she pointed at Imani. Mm-hmm. And everyone stood and started cheering. Imani got a standing ovation. And it was kind of an amazing thing that from a cognitive therapy perspective, you see her misery. And if you're a listener, your misery doesn't result from your flaws. We have a lot of flaws, all of us. Rhonda's got flaws, and Matt's got flaws, and David is kind of a huge mega package of flaws. And the older I get, the more flawed I become. But her flaws and your flaws could never upset you. Weren't upsetting her. It was this mean way of beating up on herself all the time, saying, oh, look, they're better, and I'm no good. I've got this fault. I've got that fault. I went to this crappy school. I grew up in this dangerous neighborhood, and that type of thing. And it's the decision to start loving yourself. Mm-hmm. And you can't earn love. You give love, just like you'd give love to your child who scared or fell and skinned his knee or her knee and was screaming and frightened. You love your child because your child needs your love. And that's kind of like the secret of enlightenment or self-esteem or whatever you want to call it too. It's just a choice that you make. But the odd thing, you see, is once she decided to start loving herself, then her magic came out. You see, and that's why I call it the acceptance paradox, because paradoxically, the moment you accept yourself, warts and all, at that moment, everything changes. And self-acceptance is the greatest change a human being can make, and that's a paradox. But everything about you in the world will change when you accept yourself exactly as you are without any changes. But anyway, those are a few rambly thoughts.
That's a great story. I love that.
Another experience we had together, David, when you were teaching the residents, and I was in that group with you at Stanford. One of the other residents was feeling really down and depressed and inferior and inadequate, and was feeling doubly ashamed because they thought, oh, this proves what a fraud I am. Here I am supposed to be helping people and teaching people how to recover, but I myself am stuck feeling depressed and upset. And it was the acceptance paradox that set her free when she realized that her deep understanding of what it's like to feel these horrible feelings that are associated with depression was what was inevitably going to make her so much better at understanding her patients and empathizing with them. And she stopped seeing it as some terrible thing that she needed to feel ashamed of, but she saw it as her path to connecting and really empathizing at a deeper level.
I didn't know who it was at first, but now I think I know who. And she called me the next morning because she had a patient who felt defective. And I was showing her here techniques to help someone who feels defective. And then she started crying doing the supervision, said, really, I have a patient like this, but I have the same problem. And I feel like, my father was a violent alcoholic and I never had a childhood. And I feel defective too. And it was so sad. And then she called me the next morning after we had that session because she came to accept her defectiveness is the best thing about her. I told her, I like you so much more now knowing that you feel defective because you're beautiful, you publish papers, you're brilliant, you have a wonderful family, you're one of the beautiful people. I was never one of them. So I've never felt close to you. But now when you tell me how you're feeling inside, suddenly I feel so close to you. And she suddenly saw her defectiveness not as a curse, but as a blessing. And she called me the next morning, got me up about 6:30. And she said, Dr. Burns, I'm so sorry to be calling you this early in the morning, but I just want to tell you that I don't feel like a psychiatrist anymore. I feel like an evangelist. I just can't wait to see my patients who feel defective, and I'm going to tell them, boy, do I have some good news for you. But so what was the method that she used to get to enlightenment? How did that work?
I think it was externalization of voices ultimately that we had built up to doing a lot of the cost benefit analysis and looking at our good reasons to maintain some feeling of shame about that.
Yeah, right. Well, this was a good excursion. Maybe we'll do acceptance part 2 one of these days, because I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. People shoot the shit about acceptance because it makes them feel like, oh, I'm mystical. I'm cool. I talk about acceptance. I got it through meditation, or I'm hoping to one of these days, or whatever. But I think having actual, what is acceptance and what are the tools we can use to get people there? And as you say, Matt, externalization of voices is the most powerful tool for bringing people to enlightenment quickly.
Yeah, I look forward to part 2 on this.
Yeah, me too.
We'll see what our users say, see if we get any feedback on this one.
Well, let's end this podcast with kind of a fun question that it says here Philoma asked, but it could be Phil.
I think it's Phil, and I think the OMAS has to do with his website or his email address or something like that.
Okay, well, Phil asked, hey, David, Rhonda, and Matt, I can't thank you enough for all your hard work and effort. Where do you guys get all your energy?
Well, I'll answer mine real quickly, and then Matt will give there's a deep answer to this. But I get mine from just one large cup of coffee in the morning, and then I'm on top of the world. And the only problem with it is that sometimes I get so high, I start, writing a chapter for a book or something for the web, for the app. I had this thing I was writing for the app. And then Jeremy said, isn't this a little abstract? And I suddenly looked at it. It was so boring and pathetic. And I just today removed it and put it down in the basement where we put our rejected material, because I just, the coffee, you get kind of, oh man, this is so amazing. What I'm saying is so deep and fantastic. And then it's just a lot of boring pontification. But I love a cup of coffee in the morning. What's your secret, Matt?
Well, I need that as well as some other stuff, David. You helped me with a terrible bout of procrastination that I once had, where I learned that making a very small commitment to trying a few things that, could make some progress in one's life or overcome an obstacle or have the potential for some pleasure or satisfaction, just doing a little bit of something like 5 minutes or making the world's smallest commitment would get me out of those funks when I would be kind of stuck on the couch, not wanting to do anything and feeling all blah and convinced nothing would be fun today. And my current go-to is to wash one spoon.
I love that.
I made a commitment that if I'm feeling that way, I hate feeling that way. And I can always get myself to just go in, all right, I'll wash one spoon. And by the time I put that one on up to dry, I feel like, I'll do this other one while I'm at it. And pretty soon all the dishes are done and I'm feeling like I've accomplished something. I feel better about myself and I want to do more stuff and take
that
on more.
works for me too. Melanie just gave me some tax confusion thing from Penguin Random House, a discrepancy between this form they sent us and some payments that they made. And I'm just feeling like this is going to be the most awful thing in the world to have to do. It's just, I feel so weighed down. Maybe I can postpone this, put it off. But I know it's like what you said. If I just, first of all, can I find them in my computer? Do you see one little thing? Can I find an email from someone there? And then I'll get, that wasn't that hard. And then I'll do another little thing and another little thing. In 5 or 10 minutes, I'll be done with this. And then I'll just feel high. So I think doing a tiny assignment on something you're procrastinating on, just 5 minutes worth of work on anything you've been putting off that's weighing on you, that's another source of tremendous energy potentially. None of these things will work for everybody, but that works for most people. It certainly works for me too, Matt. What's your secret, Rhonda?
Okay. Well, often the three of us start our day with some kind of exercise, and that's a big source of energy. And I know that we've talked about that. David, you like to go jogging. And
I do not like to go jogging. I go jogging. I call it slogging because I'm so slow. People can't even tell that I'm jogging. And I do it, but I do not like it. I hate it, but I do it.
What do you do, Matt?
I'm currently doing these classes called Pure Barre. And I'm the only guy in the class, and it totally kills me. I can hardly stand up after I've done one of these classes. And then afterwards, I feel just really nice and relaxed all day and mellow.
Beautiful.
I sleep well, and it just feels great. I have more spring in my step. And
nice.
I was thinking about this when I was doing my slogging just before our podcast. And when I am out there, I just think, can I get 20 feet from where I'm at? And I'll look at a spot on the pavement and say, I wonder if I can run to there or on the path. And then when I get to there, I do another one like that. And that kind of works for me too, to pass the time. And when I'm teaching workshops, that's all I do. I just say, I'm going to do this little segment now. Mm-hmm. And see how this goes. And then I get excited about that. And then, now here's another little segment. I try to break things into small chunks, similar to that procrastination thing, but a slightly different application of it. And I find that I can do, I can't do them anymore because of the COVID, but I used to do 4-day intensives where I'm teaching all day for 4 days in a row to a large audience. And some days I even do evening sessions. So it's like 14 or 15 hours, but that's the same thing. Just I'm never trying to do more than about 5 or 10 minutes worth, breaking things into little small chunks. And one other thing I learned from a girlfriend when I was in medical school. I went to visit her in Sweden, actually, which was really fun to visit. But she said that if you're feeling down, just schedule something so you have something to look forward to. And that's another simple thing. We use that with the pleasure predicting sheet, one of the techniques we use for treating depression. And that can be a really surprisingly effective tool as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the other thing I'm going to say what I do for exercise. Before COVID, I'm a martial artist, and I was taking karate classes 3 or 4 times a week. And then when COVID hit, they were down to nothing because all the gyms were closed. And now I'm back to 2 times a week. Yay. And that gives me a lot of energy.
Cool.
And I'm really happy about that. And then I do boring things in between.
Okay.
But the other thing that gives me energy is relationships. Like knowing that we're going to be doing this podcast with you, Matt, and you, David, that gave me a lot of energy in advance of the podcast. And, when there's a great connection with the client or patient, that gives me energy and enthusiasm. And then, one of the great things about COVID and working from home is that every once in a while I can come out and see what my husband, Michael, is doing, and we can give each other a hug and then go off on our own separate ways again. And that gives me energy too.
Well, there's some energy pills for everyone. So I hope that answers the question a little bit anyway.
Okay, well, I think this is it for today. What do you guys think?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. It's always a pleasure hanging out with you, Matt. And I'm just so glad we used to do this every week when you were a resident and I was your supervisor. It was so much fun. And now it's kind of like hanging out again. And I really treasure it. And it's always great to hang out with you too, Rhonda. It's just one of the joys of my life.
Me too.
Yeah, this is so much fun. Thank you for inviting me on again. And David, thank you for all that you've taught me through the years. You're tremendously generous and can think of no one wiser or has offered me more on this topic.
Well, we've had fun and we're lucky. The group that's clustered around us is just, I just feel so fortunate.
Me too. Thank you, Rhonda.
Me too. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.